What if the fear that follows you in the quiet hours is based on a misunderstanding? What if the thing you've been taught to dread since childhood is not a punishment, not an accident, not a cruel twist of fate, but a decision you once made with absolute clarity? Not here, not with this body, but before any of this began. What if, before your first breath, before your name, before your story unfolded, a deeper part of you already knew how this chapter would close? Sit with that for a moment. Because according to one of the most documented and controversial psychics of the 20th century, Edgar Cayce, your death is not random. It is not meaningless, and it is not a cosmic mistake. He claimed that before incarnation, the soul participates in the design of its own exit, not out of self-destruction, not out of punishment, but out of purpose. Cayce was not a prophet standing on a mountain. He was not the leader of a movement chasing power. He was a simple man from Kentucky, a photographer by trade, who discovered that when he entered a trance state, he could access what he called a universal archive of consciousness. In those altered states, he spoke of something he named the Akashic Records, a kind of metaphysical library where every thought, every action, every lifetime of every soul is preserved beyond time and space. And within those records, he describes something that unsettles the mind but strangely comforts the heart. The soul chooses. It chooses its parents. It chooses its struggles. It chooses its lessons. And yes, it chooses the manner and timing of its departure. Immediately, the mind resists. Why would anyone choose pain? Why would a soul agree to illness, tragedy, or loss? Why would consciousness sign up for suffering? Because the soul does not measure experience the way the ego does. Cayce spoke of a higher aspect of the self, what he called the superconscious, the version of you that exists beyond the limits of memory and personality, the part that sees lifetimes the way you see days. From that vantage point, death is not an ending. It is a transition, a doorway, a graduation ceremony after a long and complex curriculum. To the superconscious, the physical body is a costume. The lifetime is a role. And death is the moment the actor steps backstage. There is a recorded reading from 1923 where a woman came to Cayce in terror. For generations, the women in her family had died during childbirth. Her mother, her grandmother. She was convinced she was next. Fear had already written her future. In trance, Cayce described a different story. He spoke of a lifetime in ancient Rome where she had been a midwife who lost many mothers during delivery. She carried guilt across incarnations. In 2 subsequent lives, he said, she chose to experience death in childbirth, not as punishment, but as understanding, to release blame, to balance perspective. But in this life, he told her, the lesson was complete. The cycle no longer served her growth. She would live. And she did. She gave birth to 4 children. She died peacefully at 89, surrounded by grandchildren. The fear dissolved when awareness replaced it. This was Cayce's pattern. Again and again, in thousands of documented readings over more than 4 decades, he returned to the same theme. The soul reviews what he described as karmic imbalances before incarnation. Not debts in the sense of punishment, but incompletions in the sense of experience. If a soul has known only power, it may choose vulnerability. If it has known only control, it may choose surrender. If it has known only safety, it may choose risk. Not because it deserves pain, but because it seeks wholeness. He once described a woman with an intense fear of water. No trauma in this life could explain it. In trance, he traced it to a previous lifetime ending in drowning. But here is the part that reframes everything. He said the fear was intentionally carried over, not as punishment, but as protection while she focused on other lessons. And her death in this life would have nothing to do with water, because that chapter had already closed. According to Cayce, souls do not travel alone. Between lifetimes, he spoke of what he called soul groups, clusters of consciousness that incarnate together repeatedly, shifting roles to accelerate growth. Your child today may have been your parent before. Your rival may once have been your closest companion. Even betrayal, in this framework, becomes a contracted role in a shared curriculum. And death. Death is intermission. Cayce described it as a gathering between acts, a reunion backstage where souls review the performance, integrate the lessons, and plan the next entrance. There was a man tormented by recurring dreams of being burned alive. The imagery was vivid. Flames, judgment, terror. In a trance reading, Cayce connected the dream to a lifetime during the Salem witch trials, where the man had served as a judge condemning innocent women. In a subsequent incarnation, he experienced execution by fire himself, not for revenge, but for comprehension, to feel the weight of what he once delivered. But in his current life, Cayce said, his death would be gentle, surrounded by souls he once wronged, now returned as loving family members. The dream stopped after the reading. Something within him remembered. From Cayce's perspective, souls tend to choose one of three general patterns for departure. The first is what could be called the completion death. This is when a soul has integrated the primary lessons it came to experience. There is often a quiet readiness. You may have witnessed it. An elder who seems to glow in their final weeks, who speaks of feeling prepared, who waits for certain conversations to conclude before letting go. Cayce once read for a 78-year-old man plagued by dreams of dying. In trance, he said, "You have completed your cycle. You have taught patience through your stubbornness. You have taught forgiveness through your flaws." The dreams are not warnings. They are invitations. 6 months later, the man passed peacefully in his sleep. His family described his final months as the happiest of his life. The second pattern is more difficult to accept. The catalyst death. These are the departures that seem premature. The child who leaves too soon. The sudden accident. The diagnosis that shocks a family into silence. According to Cayce, some souls volunteer for these exits not primarily for their own evolution, but to catalyze transformation in others. A grieving mother once sought him after losing her 5-year-old daughter to illness. She was drowning in despair. In trance, Cayce described the child as a soul who had once taught her in ancient Egypt. The brief incarnation was not a failure. It was a mission. He told the mother to watch what would grow from her grief. She later founded one of the early grief support groups in America, helping thousands navigate loss. The child's short life became the seed of a movement. Even public figures have echoed this strange alchemy of suffering. Steve Jobs once reflected that his cancer diagnosis forced him into a level of clarity that reshaped his work and priorities. From this lens, illness and even death can act as catalysts, not glorified, not romanticized, but transformative. The third pattern Cayce described could be called the liberation death. These are souls who enter particularly challenging lives, severe disability, chronic illness, profound limitation, for accelerated growth. Their departure becomes a release from an intense assignment. He gave a reading for a father whose son lived with severe cerebral palsy. The boy could not speak, could not walk, required constant care. The father's question was simple and raw. Why? In trance, Cayce described the soul as one who had misused authority in another era and now chose complete dependence to cultivate humility and to teach unconditional love to those around him. He said the boy's death would not be defeat, but victory. When the child eventually passed at 17, nurses spoke of an inexplicable peace in his final days. A presence, a lightness, as if something unseen was lifting. Cayce referred to the moment of death as the great remembering. The instant when consciousness separates from the physical frame and the veil dissolves. In that transition, he said, memory floods back, not only of this life, but of many. The plan, the agreements, the reasons. There is no panic in that space, he insisted. Only recognition, only understanding. Interestingly, many individuals who report near-death experiences describe a life review, a panoramic awareness where every action is felt from both sides. Not judged, understood. If Cayce's perspective is even partially true, then death is not the opposite of life. It is its integration point. And here's why this matters. If your soul has already accounted for your exit, if the deeper intelligence within you has already mapped the doorway, then fear begins to lose its grip. Not instantly, not completely, but gradually. You stop living as if death is stalking you randomly, and you begin living as if your time here, however long or short, is intentional. This does not encourage recklessness. It does not dismiss grief. It does not minimize tragedy. It reframes them within a larger architecture. The question shifts. Not how will I die, but how will I live before that moment arrives? Cayce's legacy was not simply the claim that the soul chooses its departure. It was the implication that life itself is a conscious participation, that you are not a victim of cosmic chaos, but a collaborator in a much larger design. If something in this resonates, not intellectually, but quietly, somewhere beneath thought, then you are already touching that deeper layer of yourself, the layer that is not afraid, the layer that remembers. Share this with someone who is wrestling with loss, someone who is afraid, someone who feels that death is only darkness. And if you haven't yet joined this journey with us, subscribe. Not for notifications, not for numbers, but because these conversations are not surface level. They are reminders. Reminders that your entrance was intentional, and so is your exit. The mystery is not how your story ends. The mystery is how courageously, how consciously, how magnificently you choose to live until that final scene unfolds. Your soul already knows the ending. The real question is, what will you do with the middle?